Hello everyone, welcome back to class 7 I believe for Art 634 Intro to Computer Graphics, 3D Computer Graphics. Now last week we were trying to build the axe and we're running into some issues in terms of how to construct it, and I believe that the disconnect came from understanding the importance of good topology. So we're going to take some time to go over the difference between good topology and bad topology. But first we have to understand what exactly it is. Topology is how the shapes or polygons are connected to one another, right? So these are both considered forms of topology. And it's essentially how the wiring or the shapes are kind of connected to one another. Now, this obviously looks much cleaner than this. This looks like it's chaotic, and you can't really tell the thinking behind the structure. But with this, you can see the curving of the lines. You can see how everything lines up. It's very clean. This is considered good topology. And we're going to go over why it matters, and why you should always try to kind of plan out what your topology is going to look like before you dive right in, okay? So why topology matters? Well, it matters because, well, for a few reasons. Lighting, structure, game performance, textures, right? When you have easy topology, it's much easier to understand, okay, I know that based on the structure of this is going to look like a roof when I create UV mapping. It's organized, right? And when you have organized pieces of artwork, it allows anyone who gets their hands on it to understand the way that it's structured, and it just runs with better performance. Okay, so good topology is easy to modify. Bad topology is, well, it's a nightmare. So you're going to want to make sure that you keep in mind exactly the shape of your model, or essentially understand why your model should be structured a certain way. And we're going to get into how to plan out your different vertices, lines, and planes. Okay, so let's go ahead and dive right in. Just based on what we're looking at here, based on the shape of the polygons, we can kind of already tell what this is just by looking at it. And for those of you who don't know, this is what we used to use back in the late 1900s to listen to music. This is a cassette, okay? But you can tell based on the quads and just the basic shape of how clean this is, right? This is going to be very easy to texture later or UV unwrap. And the reason why you want to actually have good topology is when you create smoothing groups, or when you create, there's a modifier called turbo squid. That will multiply the amount of polygons you have in an object, and that will in turn create a higher resolution of your model. Now when that happens, if you have good topology, you'll have something that looks like this. Let me go back to, or you'll have something that looks like this, right? If you have bad topology, it'll try to smooth everything out and create awfulness. Okay, so like I said, we're going to go over how to look at an object and try to think of the best ways that we can just structure it out. And there are some things to keep in mind as well, right? Like, how are you going to transition from multiple, like say for example you want to have 8 polygons tall or height, and then have a transition into 3 or 2. There are different techniques, and we will go over how to create that. But yeah, there are things to keep in mind. When you can create quads, always use quads. Try to use triangles as minimal as possible. Ask yourself, do I need this triangle? Do I need this tri? No? Then make it a quad. Okay? So even for here, these are all quads. Everything here, everything you see here, with the exception of this. This is a triangle. But that's the only, this triangle, and I think these are the only triangle pieces, I believe, on this entire, and I think right there, and right there. Yeah, I think those are the only triangles that you'll see. Oh, and down here, my bad. So, but the rest, the majority, are all quads. So try to use as many quads as possible, okay? Now, like we were talking about from beforehand, there is something called Turbo Smooth. It's also Subdivide in Blender. When you have clean topology and you subdivide, it'll show in the subdivide, right? Because it's multiplying everything from this one square by 4 by 4, so by 16, right? So if you look at this square here, you'll see in the same amount of space 4 by 4. Same thing here, 4 by 4. And you can increase the subdivides, but this is essentially how Turbo Smooth works. And you're going to want to keep this in mind when it comes to the structure of your models, because how do I say this? Based on how your models are created will determine how objects can pinch, right? The more subdivisions you have, right, in a certain area, or how this is created, the more your mesh will be able to bend, right? It'll be able to bend a lot easier. Like for example, just looking at this, I can tell that the way that this is structured, just this blue one, it looks more like a knee, and this looks like a hinge almost, which is why you have it coming down like this, right? But these come outward, so these aren't supposed to bend, but this looks like it's supposed to bend. And then here in this middle part, this is supposed to like bend or whatever. And yeah, you can kind of get an idea of the flow of the structure based off the amount of topology. And it also creates a sense of three dimension in itself, right? So there are techniques to transition from one polygon to 2 to 3 to 4 to whatever. And this is just a quick graph to kind of give you some ideas on how to transition from low poly structures when you subdivide, right? And this kind of gives you an idea, and this is just one level. This divides it by 1, while the other one over here divides it by 4, or I should say divides it by 2. So for example, this block is 2 by 2, and the other one is 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. So just based off of this, you can kind of see the structure. This, the 2 to 1 here, look how kind of messy this looks. It does work, but it's very messy compared to its counterpart here, right? The flow of these polygons are much, much cleaner than this side over here, right? And look at this, right? Even with this, this looks like it could be maybe like some kind of joint here, a knee, or even here, this could be like the middle of a knee, right? Same thing here, same thing here, right? Perfect. So let's go ahead, and having good topology, like I said, allows you to manipulate bend and warp. That's why you always want to try to add things in quads. Quads are much easier to bend than tris or n-gons, which are illegal polygons. So this is particularly important when you're doing objects that are going to animate. When objects are animated and they have bendy parts like knees or joints, it's important to make sure that you're setting up your topology correctly, so that way you don't have anything that's going to cause like pinching. Let me see if I can find, for example, here, right? Just based off of this is like a leg or something, I can tell that this is the top of the leg, this is the joint right here, and you can actually see a bone going through it right here. So you have the leg, you have the knee, and then the bottom, or maybe this is like an elbow or something. And when the object deforms, it maintains most of its shape, right? But if you were to just have a bunch of, like, if you were just making a big tube and then you bend it, look at how badly that deforms. You don't want that, right? So you have to be very conscientious about how your object is going to move. And we'll get into how to create joints probably next week. Okay. But in the meantime, when we look at organic objects, we want to take notice of how the lines move with the structure, right? This looks like it's just very chaotic and triangular. There's no real flow to the object. They're both smooth, but look, you can understand what's happening with the line work here, right? And it's the same thing on this model, right? You can understand the weight of the topology and how everything kind of flows together, whereas this is all just insanity. And this is also, if you get close here, you can actually start to see that a lot of inorganic objects, there's a lot of circular topology, right? When you're creating organic objects, specifically like the eyes, the nose, and the mouth, you want to start with a circle around, and you actually just start with a plane and you just keep extruding until you come up with a loop, and then you just expand outwards from there. So yeah, we'll go over how to create this probably in the last week. It is difficult, it is challenging, but once you understand the do's and don'ts of topology, it should be a lot easier to digest. Okay? All right, so we're going to do some tutorials after this, or I'll supply some tutorials that we're going to do in class, and then we will go from there. Talk to you later.